Hey, what's going on, everyone? Nick Yuskevich here with Daily Fantasy Winners. We've got the next episode of Tee to Green here, and it's for the Masters. This is going to be part one of two parts for this the upcoming first major of the year. This part one's just going to be kind of like an overview slash preview of the Masters in terms of just some basics about the tournament, some scoring things, some statistics to look at, and then just a few things tips-wise as far as like with lineup construction, and then it's also as well as like things having related to do with weather. And then in part two, which will come out probably not too, I don't know exactly when this video is coming out. I'm recording this on the Thursday before the Masters, so like it's opening day of baseball today. And then, it's like Houston just kicked off. So hopefully get this uploaded here, here sometime near this weekend. And then I'll have, obviously the part two coming out pretty shortly after that. And then part two will have like all the breakdown of like the different players in the field. And as far as just examining them and like who I like, who I don't, or just kind of breaking it down a little bit. I probably won't go through every single player in the whole video because it's a lot of players, but I'll definitely go through more than like just like the top like 5 golfers that I've been doing like on the previous Tee to Green videos here just for this season. So I don't know how many I'll go through, but it'll certainly be more than like the top 5. And so yeah, those so we got 2 parts to do, and so this will be part 1. So here we go. So starting off with just a few basics here. Obviously, this is the first major of the year. It is it's a great field. It's kind of like the last like official kickoff to golf season. Some average fans think that like the Masters is like the official kickoff to golf season, which is fine, whatever. But so this is kind of like the last official kickoff to golf season. Really get it going. So obviously a very good field. It is only 88 players in the tournament this year. That's a little bit less than normal. Obviously, this number could change slightly if like the winner of the Houston Open does qualify. If the winner of the Houston Open is not currently qualified for the Masters, then it becomes 89. Or if like there's a couple like withdrawals or for whatever reason for injury, then the number could get even lower than 88. But for right now, it's at 88. And so normally the size of the field is usually like in the low to mid 90s. We're at a few players less this year. The main reason for that is because of all the different ways you can qualify for the Masters. I think there's like 12 or 13 different ways you can qualify for it. I don't remember the exact total number, but there are just a lot of overlap this year. And what I mean by that is like one of the ways you can qualify for the Masters is by just winning a tournament in the last 12 months, basically since the last Masters. Well, for the people that have won a tournament since then, they've also like qualified in other ways. Like there just haven't been as many like obscure PGA Tour winners in the last 12 months. The cream of the crop or like the top like X amount of players have been really good. They've actually been winning golf tournaments. And so there just aren't as many like oddball players in this field. There's just a lot of really good players, and it's kind of like weeded out a little of a couple of the odd ones. There's still some in there, like don't get me wrong, and you still have like the past champs that have like little to no shot of like making the cut, let alone winning. And so it is a little bit fewer, so it is a slightly smaller field. There is a cut, as I'm sure like all of you know. It is smaller fields sometimes don't have cuts. This does have a cut, but because it is a smaller field at 88 people. There is, it's not top 70 plus ties. They're not just cutting like 15, 20 people. They are cutting. It's top 50 plus ties, but it also including besides the top 50 plus ties is the only major or only golf tournament that does this on the PGA Tour. If you are within 10 shots of the lead after 36 holes, then you also make the cut. So let's say the leader of the tournament let's just say he's like 5 under par, let's say, and if you're 5 over or like 4 over or whatever, and you're in 73rd place, or sorry, that's bad. If you're in like 53rd place, let's say, and you're 4 or 5 over par, you would still make the cut actually, even though you're outside the top 50. So being within 10 shots of the lead or in the top 50 plus ties is the way you can make the cut. And so, and usually what'll happen with that is I don't really have any like good information. I didn't look up the data as far as like how often the 10 shot rule comes into play, but I will say though that usually what'll happen is if you have a Masters that has really easy scoring conditions, and the Masters with Augusta is actually like a tournament that gets really wide variance of like scores that are, just scores at the tournament itself, but also on a year-to-year basis of what the weather provides. So like if you have a tournament that has really easy scoring conditions where like the ground's really soft and it's warm out and it's humid and like, the ball's not like it's just a lot easier to stick and hold on the greens. And then that gives more of an opportunity for someone that's playing well to like kind of like separate themselves from the pack. And you'll get an example of like Jordan Spieth in 2015 where he shot like, I think it was like I think he like tied the Masters record like 18, 19 under, whatever it was, a few years ago. And so like that was a thing where like nobody was going to like it was really obvious like probably no one was going to catch Spieth, but like that was where like the 10-shot rule would not have come into play because obviously Spieth had separated himself so much. If he just took the like I don't know where exactly cut off, but you get what I'm saying here, that like it was definitely just going to be top 50 plus ties was going to be the cutoff for Spieth in that year. But if you take another year where it's really difficult scoring conditions and it's just hard to separate from the pack, more like what the U.S. Open usually is, with really tough scoring conditions, then it's more likely that like the 10-shot rule could come in just because you have a lot more people jam-packed that are just trying to get by making pars and avoiding the big mistakes and things like that. So just wanted to point that out. And and so like with the winning score here at the Masters, like you can have, like I say, like the winning score is a very wide variance. Like over the last few years, it's averaged out to being about 11 under par, but that's really like it's not like the greatest measure just to use, just because it's not like a lot of tournaments on tour, you get roughly the same winning score every year. You just don't get that at the Masters. We've seen it where like Spieth had won it that one year, like 18, 19 under. And then like you go back to like 2007, the conditions were very cold and the ground was very firm. And it was very difficult hitting approach shots into the greens. And it was really windy as well, of course. And so Zach Johnson won it that year in 07 with, it was like 1 or 2 over par actually. And so you just get a really wide variety of winning scores here, depending what the weather conditions are. And I'll touch on weather here at the end of the episode and kind of how we want to look at that. So, but moving on to scoring here, we'll take a look here at the PGA Tournament History tool here on Daily Fantasy Winners. And so this is, if I filter this by average score in relation to par, you will see that the Masters is the second toughest in relation to par right here. Average score here over the last few years, going back since 2014, is 1.698 strokes over par. So the average score for 18 holes here is 73.7, as you can tell. And obviously it makes sense that like Masters is one of the toughest, being a major championship, and behind the U.S. Open, which is obviously known to being the toughest. And as you can see, by far it is the toughest. So pretty obvious there. And then the other thing I wanted to point out with this is, as far as like the scoring hole by hole here, you will see if you go through it, I'll just tell you right now, is from an eagle standpoint, there are a decent amount of eagles. It's a par 72. There are 4 par 5s. All of them have the potential for eagles, but really it's the 2 par 5s on the back, 13 and 15, that give a lot of eagle opportunities. There's water that obviously comes into play on both, but as you guys well know, I'm sure if you know anything about Augusta National, but they're short par 5s. They're hittable in 2 for any golfer of any distance, really. And so unless like the wind's like really blowing into you on 15 or something like that, but hole 2 is even like got some eagle opportunities depending where the pin placement is. It's a little bit tougher. And then 8's the toughest because it's the longest hole and it's also uphill. But some of the longer hitters can eagle that occasionally. And so, but there are no penalty strokes on that hole. So anyways, eagles do come up here relatively frequently. But there are very few birdies, very few pars. There are a ton of bogeys. It's the second most bogeys, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I'll just filter it by bogeys. Yeah, second most bogeys, and it's like top 5 in doubles or more for the Masters. And so you get a lot of wide variance at scores here. You get some really good eagles, and then you get some disastrous holes as well. And so and then birdies wise, you actually just don't get that many here. You get them on the par 5s, obviously, if you don't end up eagling them, but hard to get birdies on the par 4s as well. So unless like you have really easy scoring conditions. So okay, in any case, that's it for the scoring relation portion. I want to move on to statistics. In terms of what to look at, this is really kind of pretty straightforward. Strokes gained tee to green shows up a ton here for obvious reasons. It shows up for off the tee and approaching the green, but it does show up a little bit more for approaching the green, and I still think it means a lot more when it comes to approaching the green for the Masters. The reasoning for why I think it matters is the biggest challenge in playing Augusta National is hitting your approach shots to the right portions of the green of where the pin placement's at. If you know anything about Augusta National greens, they are severely like multi-tiered, and they have like they're like these several different little like bowls and sections. And if you hit an approach shot into the wrong bowl or section, you're just going to end up with like a 40-50 footer that has like a double or triple break that's, you know, uphill and then downhill and all this kind of stuff. Like, you really have to be very precise with your approach shots, and that's where strokes gained approaching the green comes into play. And it's also where experience can come into play a little bit here. And I'll actually just use this to feed in, because this is going to be one of my first tips when it comes to making your lineups here, is that if you can use first timers in your lineup, like, it's not like you can't do that, but I do think experience matters here a little bit more than what it would for an average PGA Tour tournament, because the strokes gained approaching the green is very difficult in terms of where you're locating your shots. Some of the shots are a little bit are somewhat blind, if you will. You'll have uphill shots, or you'll just have shots that are severely protected by bunkers, and it's harder to see like exactly where you're supposed to land it. I mean, obviously you get your caddy books that can tell you where you need to land it and play your practice rounds and whatnot. But still, it's one of those things where it's where experience can help here a little bit. I do think that the thing that there's a little bit of a narrative out there that says like first timers never won here. They never do well here. I think that's a little bit blown out of proportion, because like if you're a first timer playing here, you're likely at the very beginning of your career, or you're likely, you know, maybe just not like one of the best players in the PGA Tour, and you happen to win a PGA Tour event and you got to qualify or something like that. So it's like, I think it's a little blown out of proportion when you just consider who are all the first timers that usually show up here every year. But having said that, I do think experience does matter here a little bit, and there is a little bit of truth to that, even though the reasoning on it's a little false for whatever reason. But so I do think experience and strokes gained approaching the green can matter here a little bit. Those are good things to look at. Strokes gained putting does not show up here at all. And I still hear this probably, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit more in the mainstream golf media than I hear it, maybe more from the DFS crowd. I still see it a little bit in the DFS crowd, so I figure I'll mention here again. And this is just a general rule of thumb when you're evaluating like what kind of golfers you want to look for at a specific course. But when it comes to putting, if the golf course has really easy greens, or by comparison to the other golf courses, and they're smaller, they're relatively flat, they're just not as challenging, strokes gained putting does matter more there. But if the greens are very difficult, they're multi-tiered, they're super fast greens, that means that strokes gained putting does not matter as much. The reasoning for that is because when you have greens that are super difficult, or they're super firm, or fast and multi-tiered and all that type of stuff, there is a lot more variance. There is just the ball, there's a lot of variance just in putting overall, and there's a reason why it shows up statistically when you examine it, of why it's such a high variance statistic. Because when a ball is traveling just on the ground for X amount of the time, it's like, there's a reason why pros complain about the way the ball like rolls certain times on the greens, whether it's like spike marks, or whether it's just like it just does something that they don't think it's going to do. It's really difficult to read greens, and the ball does, sometimes there's just variance in the way it rolls on the ground, and it doesn't do what you think it's going to do or what it's supposed to do. Like, that happens all the time, even at like a golf course like Augusta. And I mean, it's perfectly well maintained. I'm not saying they don't maintain it well. That was like the last thing I'm saying, but it's just an extremely difficult golf course when it comes to putting there, in terms of all the different breaks that you have to deal with. And so it's just actually one of those things where just the more difficult the putting is, it just creates more variance. And so usually if you're a good putter and you're going to a golf course with much easier greens, you know what these putts are going to do, and your like consistency and your skill in terms of like making putts will show up more, because the ball's doing what it's supposed to do, like on the ground, and it's not as hard to like read like a 4 foot or like a 20-foot putt that has like a 4-foot break to the right and like downhill or something like that, like whatever it is. And so in any case, so strokes gained putting does not show up here. And just like, even simply, and I'll just say it like this simply, if you look back at like the past Masters champs, like Sergio Garcia won it last year. He is a below average putter, and he tied he won, but he went into the playoff with Justin Rose. Justin Rose is an average putter on the PGA Tour over his career. Last last year, or 2016 winner, Danny Willett, he is a below average putter. 2015, Jordan Spieth, yes, he is obviously a very good putter. Not this year, but so far, but he is obviously usually a very good putter. And so, but he's also a very good strokes gained approaching the green, and even strokes gained off the tee, he's not that bad. And so it's more, I would say that the reason why Jordan Spieth has done so well at the Masters actually has more to do with his approach shots at Augusta and staying in position all the time, as opposed to the strokes gained putting showing up there. And then obviously Bubba Watson in 2014 and 2012, he's won here twice. He is a below average putter. And then Adam Scott in 2013, even that's when you could still have the anchored putter, which he was doing back in 2013 when he won. His putting still was like average. I think he was like ranked like 105th or something like that in strokes gained putting in 2013. And he was just like an average putter even with that. And so obviously it became a little bit worse when when they banned the anchored putting, and now he's back to being like kind of average. I forget exactly where he's at off the top of my head, but and so it kind of shows you that like a lot of times we've had here of champions over the last several years here that usually if you're just like average tee to green and you're a good in strokes gained putting, you typically don't do well here. You can, I mean, it's not like impossible. You definitely can, but that usually does not work out most of the time. So. Anyway, so that's it from the statistics standpoint. So just a few things tips wise here, and I will dive into like a bunch of other things strategy wise as I'm talking about the players in part 2 here, but I just wanted to run over a few tips here. I said the experience thing again, like you can use first timers. I'm not saying you can't. I wouldn't just like say though that like, oh, I could use all first timers and play against like the theory that experience matters. I would not do that. But if you want to have a lineup with one or maybe even like 2 people who are playing here for the first time who are good players, like or decent players, that's fine. Like no problem. And the biggest thing here I would just say from a lineup strategy standpoint in GPPs is Augusta is one of the best. I mean, majors are really the best place to do it, but Augusta even especially. I would really avoid the chalk with the mid to cheap price players as much as possible in GPPs. That doesn't mean you can't play anybody that's like 10 to 15% owned. I'm not saying it has to be that strict about it. But if there is somebody like who's 7,000 or 7,500 who's 25+% owned, I would strongly recommend fading that person. Even though we're only cutting top 50 plus ties, and maybe there's going to be a 10-stroke, the 10-stroke rule for the cut. Even though we're not cutting quite as many people, the truth of the matter is every year we always have a few people that are star players or like really good players that end up missing the cut, and even like good chalky players that are like in the 7K range. It happens every single year at Augusta. The reason why, as I alluded to earlier, is that Augusta provides very high variance scoring. There's like there are a lot of eagle opportunities out there, or easy birdie opportunities if you play the par fives really well. But at the same time, there are a lot of bogeys and double bogeys out there. If you get out of position on a lot of these golf holes, making par becomes extremely difficult. And it also, when it comes to Amen Corner, the best thing about Amen Corner and really the back nine at Augusta and why it causes so much drama every year is because that's where the penalty strokes come in. The front nine at Augusta has no penalty strokes unless you have like a lost ball and you hit it in like one of the hedges. Like it is technically possible to have a penalty stroke, or you could have to take an unplayable line. Like it is possible, but from a hazard standpoint, or there's no out of bounds, I don't think at Augusta. There might be way left on 10 or something, but for the most part, like you're just talking about water at Augusta, which is holes 11, 12, 13, 15, and 16. That's where the variance comes in. So you can have those eagles or birdie opportunities, but you can also easily have bogeys and double bogeys, or you can have like quadruple bogeys on like number 12 at Amen Corner, like we've seen it. So that you get a wide variance, and this happens to like a lot of the chalky guys here. Augusta's very difficult. It is, but while providing scoring opportunities. So it's one of those things where I would just say, just from a strategy standpoint, play against the chalk of the mid-price to cheap-price players, especially on DraftKings, but both DraftKings and FanDuel, I would do it both ways. It is becoming a little bit tougher to predict the ownership, definitely, as I know I've alluded to this in the past. I know it is getting tougher, but because this is a very public tournament, by public tournament I mean we're getting a lot of casual players because it is the Masters. It's usually a wider range of people participating in the DFS contest, usually when it comes to the Masters, even like with the Millie Maker and things like that on DraftKings. So you should be seeing a lot more of like the chalky plays actually getting higher ownerships when it comes to the GPPs. We've seen in some of the other PGA Tour tournaments like DFS players getting a little bit smarter about avoiding the chalk in the GPPs, but we still see it kind of in the cheaper contest on DraftKings in particular, but both DraftKings and FanDuel. We're still seeing it in the cheaper contests that the casual players still play the chalk like in the GPPs, and that will definitely, I'm sure, show up at Augusta here with the Masters in the upcoming weeks. So just want to point that out. And the last thing, just to kind of wrap up with this, as far as what I just said, as far as if you were doing GPP lineups and you want to go all out or you want to make a ton of them, whether you want to make 50 or you want to go max out and do 150 lineups. So I would definitely be advocating for this strategy. And so that way, if you, let's say you're doing 150 lineups, I would widen your pool, not like as much as possible, but I would, if you're doing 150 lineups, you could make your player pool as many as 45, 50 people. Maybe you want to go only like 40 because, I mean, to be fair with Augusta, because this tournament is 88, it's an 88 person field, and there's going to be about a dozen of them or so that there's no way you want to play because obviously we've got some past champions here. So you're not going to play Mike Weir or Mark O'Meara, Ian Woosnam, Larry Mize. You're not going to play those guys, obviously. But so there's going to be like a dozen of former champs or type of players that you're not going to end up playing. So of 75 realistic options, you can still do like a 45, 50 player pool. Maybe you want to go as little as 35 or 40. That's fine. But I would just widen that pool of players you're using kind of in that 7 to 8K range on DraftKings that aren't going to be the highest owned. Again, like I said, we're only talking about fading maybe 2, 3 at the most 4 guys is of the highest owned. And again, we've seen this every year. I'll just say it's just the chalkiest plays very often don't end up panning out, regardless of price. And there will be, I'm sure, and I know the prices are out for the Masters, and there are some guys that are obviously standing out here just in the early going as far as who's really cheap on on DraftKings and FanDuel, as far as some guys that you can already kind of tell them who are really chalky. And I'll get into that later on the next episode. But I would just recommend fading them. It's going to work out way more often in your favor than it won't just by simply fading them. Because, even if they do make the cut, they're very likely not going to win the golf tournament. And they're not. And just because other people have this chalky play at 7,500 in their lineup, and he finishes tied for 10th or tied for 15th, that doesn't mean that person's you need that person to have the winning lineup to win the Millionaire Maker. You don't need that. You need the champion to win the Millionaire Maker. And the odds of those 1 or 2 or 3 people who are extremely highly owned of the mid to lower price players winning is extremely minimal. And you have way higher chances of that person just ending up missing the cut and having a bad day or two. So I think that makes sense to everybody. I preached this before. Go back to the other videos, obviously, if you want to hear more thoughts on what I'm talking about here. But I think it's explained pretty clearly. And then as far as weather goes, I do want to mention this because I haven't really talked about weather here as far as tee times go just this season. But part of the reasoning for that is just because there really hasn't been any tournaments where weather's come into play. I would have brought it up probably before if I had seen something, but just so far I really haven't seen anything where I think weather's worth mentioning. And again, I'm recording this a week before the Masters starts, so we don't know exactly what the weather's going to be. But I do want to mention this in case weather does become an issue. So the way the tee times work at the Masters is a little bit different than it does at other PGA Tour tournament. The way it usually works at a standard 140, 150 player tournament is that you have a morning wave and an afternoon wave, and then you flip it for Friday. So if you're teeing off Thursday morning, you're going to tee off Friday afternoon. If you're teeing off Thursday afternoon, you're going to do Friday morning. And usually you will, because it's 140, 150 players, to make this work, they tee the morning wave off of, they tee every wave off of both holes 1 and 10. So they have people covering every single, they have people covering every single golf hole by the time everybody's out on the golf course. They're not just sending everybody out on hole 1. So the way the Masters does it is, because it's only an 88 person field, they actually still do morning and afternoon waves, but they send everybody off of hole number 1. So just because this is a smaller field doesn't mean that everybody's jam-packed into teeing off within like a 1 to 2, like within like a 2-hour window, like we sometimes see at these tournaments with like smaller fields. Now they just sent everybody off of hole 1, and there is a morning and afternoon wave, so it's still the same type of concept, and you still need to look for that if we think adverse weather is going to come into play here. And adverse weather, especially when it comes to wind, absolutely matters when it comes to Augusta. If the wind is blowing on the back 9, it's not fun, especially with those approach shots coming in with the water at Race Creek on holes 11, 12, 13, and 15, and 16. It's a big deal. It really is. I mean, not to mention the holes without water where you just get out of position. It makes Augusta so much more difficult when there's wind. So it's something to keep an eye out for when we get closer. As far as like, I looked at the weather for Augusta a week away. It's borderline pointless because weather forecasts change so frequently, and no matter where you're living in the United States, like if you look at weather forecasts, it's wrong within like a couple days, like most of the time. But in any case, just for whatever it's worth, though, I did take a look at it. There is a lot of rain in the forecast for the week of Augusta. Rain usually means the golf course is easier because it softens it. It makes the greens moist, and obviously, and especially if it's humid or warm, which I think it's supposed to be like in the 60s or like low 70s. So it's not hot, but it's it's like the temperatures are fine. It's not cold, and so it should make the greens soft, and it'll probably make the golf course easier. And the winds didn't look that bad. It looked like 5 to 10 miles an hour type of thing. So as far as weather conditions go, I don't have anything to like say as far as like, oh, like we need to like be worried about this, but it's a week away, so just check back in as we get closer to it. But if that weather does hold, I would just say that that I would not pay attention to the weather. It just means we're going to have easier scoring conditions, and there's nothing really to change strategy wise, or you need to play to a certain tee time wave. If there is something that pops up as we get closer where like the winds are supposed to be really bad, like, Thursday afternoon or something, and Thursday morning's not supposed to be bad at all, then you probably want to load up more on Thursday morning tee time waves and try to play to that advantage a little bit. So in any case, hopefully that all made sense. So that's it for this video. I know it's pretty standard and straightforward stuff I've mentioned for in the past, but we've always got a few new people coming in and out, so I always want to catch them up to speed. Maybe you got a good reminder on something for the people that have been coming here for a while. So thanks again, as always, for watching. Very much appreciate it. So I'll have part 2 coming out here. Not exactly sure what day it will come out, but it should be with plenty of time to spare before the Masters, because it's a big week, obviously. So I'm at Nicky Skevich on Twitter. Daily Fantasy Winners is on Twitter at DFantasyWinners, and appreciate all the likes to our YouTube videos and subscriptions to the YouTube channel. All right, good luck, everybody.